Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 19th Minsk Forum here from Berlin. It's the third module of a conference this year in its 19th year, 24 years after its inauguration in 1997. I am Rainer Lindner. I'm the founder of that format. Back then, we started actually to discuss with our colleagues and friends from Belarus, experts, politicians, in a form of a critical dialogue to bring on an annual basis people together from different countries, from within the society, including also the government. Dear Ambassador Lüttenberg, dear Director Melle, dear Director Dr. Wölbern, it's my pleasure also to welcome you here at this distinguished opening panel here at the Konrad-Adenauer Stiftung in Berlin. Thank you for having us, Dr. Wölbern, here in this excellent place. The Minsk Forum, however, is in an exile mode, I have to say, because it was always part of the DNA of this conference to take place there, to give the opportunity to the society, to students, to the young professionals, to experts, to meet and discuss in a very open way, also to be able to speak out uncomfortable truths in an environment that over all these years was complicated, was difficult, and was a not mature political culture so far. This is why we started that format. This is why we go on with that format over the years, and also this year. It's actually the second time that we have to gather outside Belarus. For the first time in 2010, we organized a meeting after the presidential elections in Vilnius due to the political prisoners, due to the political circumstances. And then 10 years later, basically, last year we were forced by Corona, of course, but also by the political events to go online. And this year we have the opportunity to actually physically meet again, but not inside the country. My greetings therefore goes to our colleagues and friends in Belarus. And I know that you are also listening and watching us here this morning, and I want to greet you over there, and I want to encourage you to go on with your personal and political aspirations. It's the young generation basically that will have to build up the new Belarus in the forthcoming years. And I hope that we can come back sometime in the future, in the near future, I hope, together again in the format of the Minsk Forum. My thoughts are also with those who are imprisoned today, and also people who are in the woods between Poland and Belarus. I think we are facing a major crisis, also a security crisis within Europe, and I hope that we can solve this crisis quite soon. And I'm very grateful, Ambassador Lüttenberg, to the federal government to be so helpful in this context in these days. I think it's all about the humanitarian help and aid to people in need at this point of time. However, and whatever it takes to solve the crisis and to give these people a humanitarian comfort. So this is why we are in Berlin today, and I think we want also to greet people here in this auditorium, people in the online world. We know that a lot of participants in a hybrid or online way are looking and watching and following the discussion of today, which is dedicated to basically 3 topics. It's about the overall political situation. It's about the economy, how the economy can encourage the entrepreneurs, how people can do business in Belarus, and how the sanctions basically affect the current economy of this country. And we also want to look ahead. We want to understand what are the scenarios of the future. And I think it's a good opportunity also for the very active working group on Belarus, the Arbeitskreis Belarus, today to present these scenarios and options for future development. I think it's about the new generation. This is my main message this morning. It's about the young Belarusians, and male and female, people who showed last year that they want to take the future of the country in their own hands. And I think it's the new generation that will have to build and develop also the country's economy, but also the culture, the society, good governance, and other aspects of a social welfare. And I think this is something we want to talk about today, but this is also about the future of this country, in which direction Belarus basically will go. And that is why we want to discuss these scenarios. This is why we want to also go further next week to Brussels with the 4th module of this year's Minsk Forum, and also to give the European politics and organizations the opportunity to take part in that format. I think coming back to the main message and also concluding my first word this morning, it is about the young generation. It's also about they don't want to leave the country. I remember always when I do the forum, when I did the forum in the past in Belarus, we also were able to welcome our friend Levon Volsky, the great singer of Belarus. And some of you participated when we played music together back then. And he has this famous song about his own biography. I was born here. Я народился тут. And I think this is a message to stay also in the country. And I want also to greet him from here, from Berlin this morning. And I think this is one of the voices of Belarus also today. On behalf of the advisory board of the German-Belarussian Society, I want to thank the supporters of this Berlin model, especially the deutsch-russische Austausch, the DGO, Deutsche Gesellschaft für Osteuropa-Kunde, and also other organizations, of course the Konrad-Adenauer Stiftung, basically, which is with us since 1999, I have to say, and to add, the politischen Stiftung and the political foundations were always very supportive in that format, even in difficult times that we had. My wish would be today that we can return to Belarus soon with that format. And the title of this conference, 30 Years of Independence, is also a message that independence was always questioned back then and since the founding of the state, since 1991. It was questioned from within and also from without. And I think it's now, and I remember these times meeting in the Academy of Science, Chairman Shushkevich back then, to talk about the perspective of this country in a very fragile situation there. And I think it's about also securing this independence in the future. And I hope that our conference can be, also in the following years, be part of that, fighting for independence, structuring a new society, and giving Belarus the way into future. Thank you very much. And again, it's the young generation that has to take the future of this country in their own hands. It's now my pleasure to welcome again Ambassador Director Lüttenberg. He is the Director for Eastern Europe, Caucasus and Central Asia at the Foreign Office. Aus der Auswärtiges Amt, Herr Lüttenberg, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Lindner, distinguished members of the German-Belarussian Society, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, especially in Belarus today. It is my great pleasure to join you today at the Minsk Forum here in Berlin. Thank you very much for organizing this event, despite the obvious difficulties. That this year's forum takes place in Berlin and other European cities, and not in Minsk, reflects how dire the current situation is. Unfortunately, while we mark the 30th independence anniversary of Belarus, the domestic situation in the country itself is worse than ever, and relations between Germany and the West more generally, on the one hand, and the Lukashenko regime on the other hand, reached a historic low. It will soon be 500 days since the fraudulent presidential elections, and protesters and opposition members have largely been arrested, silenced, or, as some here today, driven into exile. The number of political prisoners is at a record high, and hundreds of cases of torture have been reported. We haven't forgotten them. More than that, the regime has moved on to close the few remaining spaces for civil society, even leading to the liquidation of completely unpolitical organizations or associations. Even Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran have a better World Freedom Index rating than Belarus these days. We can see the ultimate proof for the reckless nature of the Lukashenko regime, if we ever needed one, when looking at what's happening at the EU borders with Belarus these days. The cynical instrumentalization of migration against the EU is nothing short of a hybrid attack. The regime in Minsk has not only turned against its own people, it has also become a threat to international peace and security. The international community has to find a firm and resolute response to preserve international peace and security, as well as for the sake of the Belarusian people and the migrants and refugees being abused by Lukashenko. This is why on Monday, EU foreign ministers agreed on advancing a substantial fifth sanctions package. In addition, the Council expanded the criteria of the EU's Belarus sanctions regime. More concretely, this means that we are now able to also sanction entities and individuals from third states, contributing to Lukashenko's ploy to violate the EU's borders. This pressure might start to be working, as we can see from the announcements of several airlines to restrict their flights to Belarus, and we've seen the first major return to Iraq of refugees. Pressure is an indispensable, yet probably not sufficient means to bring about change. In addition, we must initiate a process that works on alternatives and a way out of the current crisis. Therefore, we need intensive dialogue among the opposition, dialogue with partners, possibly also dialogue with Moscow. And at the height of a crisis that has caused enormous humanitarian plight, we might even see the need to talk to Lukashenko. This is why Chancellor Merkel spoke to Mr. Lukashenko twice this week, without recognizing his illegitimate claim for the presidency, without making offers or deals, without appeasing him. Simply because we are in a situation where direct talks could help ending the cynical instrumentalization of migration and prevent further escalation. Already 11 people have died. And at the same time, the EU decided on another package of sanctions to keep up the pressure on Lukashenko and his regime. Ladies and gentlemen, for more than 2 decades, the Minsk Forum has been able to open and maintain channels of communication and provide a platform for exchange between civil societies, between politicians, between neighboring countries, and between representatives from Belarus itself. I urge you to continue with this wherever possible. Bringing these actors together, exploring ways for responding to the current political stalemate in Belarus, and identifying options for the future is now more relevant than ever. In this endeavor, you can count on Germany's full support. It is my sincere hope that by the time we mark the next decennial of Belarusian independence, the situation will have changed for the better. Given that all of us here today work on or with Belarus in some way, we can contribute to making this vision come true, some to a greater extent, some to a lesser. And it's certainly also up to the next generation. In this spirit, I wish us all a fruitful event today, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your statement, Mr. Lüttenberg, and for the clear message also to go on with the Minsk Forum in the future. And also thank you for your support. I have to add here that the Foreign Office has always been supportive over the last 12 years, having a program at hand that is able also to support us as many civil society initiatives in Germany. And it is always in a good tradition, and my greetings also go out to Ambassador Hutterer and his team at the embassy in Minsk to support also us when we're doing this endeavor. So thank you. Exchange, and it's not just about German-Russian. I know that you always were and are very active doing projects on Ukraine, but also on Belarus, and hopefully in the future we can also have more cooperation between our organizations. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all. I will speak in Russian and hope that will be okay for all of you.
I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy that we were invited, that you are here, that you are listening to us. Thank you very much to the organizers, the German-Belarussian Society, to organize the Minsk Forum, and to all colleagues and partners who are working on this forum. And also, I welcome all who can't be here, who are in Belarus, who are abroad in Poland, in Lithuania, in other countries. Very many Belarusians had to emigrate to these countries, and we will talk about 30 years of independence today, but we are also facing a very difficult moment, because these 30 years are a time in which a new state and a new society have developed. The people have developed, each individual, and it has been a time of search, but also a time when things decelerated. Because for 27 years the country is under one person who today is no longer the legitimate president of the country, who wants to prevent what is going on in the country, and does this with very many violent actions, with the help of his security forces, with the help of violence, with the help of falsified elections, and also, what is worse than everything else, and started last year, is continuing every day, as that we, as civil society organizations, together with our partners, are prevented from working in the country. We can't tolerate the situation. Last year, last August, when there was really big hope that people will have the opportunity at last to take the government into their hands, the German civil society started to cooperate and support. And we said that we don't want the situation to remain as it was. We are united with you, we stand behind you, and we, the German-Russian Exchange, together with other organizations, organized a working group on Belarus, which contains more than 100 organizations, experts, politicians, think tanks, who became an important resource for cooperation. This all is going on in difficult times, where a transformation is still ahead of us. The status quo is what my colleagues have already described. It is the everyday violation of human rights. People are in prison, people are in courts, they are in exile. When today, in the afternoon, there will be the presentation of strategies, of scenarios developed by our working group, we are hoping that at least one of these scenarios is becoming true, and we understand that each of these scenarios is just a proposal today. And every moment, something unpredictable is going on in the country. Of course, it was understandable that the question of the future development of Belarus is something that is going on in each city, in each town and village of the country. Things are going on. It is not only a question of the development of the country, but also of Eastern Europe, of our whole Europe, of the place we are living in. It's a question of geopolitics. And the dependence of Belarus is the independence of Belarus is under question today, not for the first time, by the way, because one big neighbor assumes that the country with its independence is no longer necessary. They are union states and are organizing an integration, which is also a little bit false. And the Russian government does not accept the independence of former Soviet Russian-speaking republics. It is also our task to support the right of independence of our neighbor states, including Belarus and Ukraine, and support them together with Belarusian and Russian partners and together with all of our European partners. I would like to express my gratitude to our friendly neighbor countries, Lithuania, Poland, who took up very many people who had to leave the country, who were not able to stay within the country, where today very many people are in dangerous situations and also have to leave in the future. It was already said, and I agree that we must not lose time. Firstly, we cannot accept that violations of rights are not judged. All the rights that were violated, what we know about, what our Belarusian colleagues know about, who are collecting the data, have to be put into court. And we very much support the Belarusian Accountability Platform for Belarus, which contains very many human rights organizations from Belarus. And we hope that and really ask for this platform to become active and effective, and also for it to contribute to transparency, to maybe even establish international tribunals in the future. The position of the next German government is going to be decisive, because the situation in the weakened European Union, the position of Germany, is a leitmotif. And Germany can form a direction, can become a leader also for other countries, for Poland, for France. And if we can unite, then maybe we can stop Mr. Lukashenko, who is no longer the legitimate president. We see the catastrophic situation on the border, which has been provoked and which shows that geopolitics can happen everywhere. It's not only a question of Iraqi or other countries, people who are asking for asylum, people who also have rights and have the right to ask for asylum. we have to understand the whole context of the situation. Why is this going on? And we have to find an opportunity to support the rights of the people and also to protect our borders. Because we don't want Mr. Lukashenko to succeed with his tactics. We hope that the European Union will remain open for all countries, also for the Eastern European countries, also including Belarus. All people who are living there, 10 million people, also people who are living in Russia, must have the opportunity to come to the EU. When people working on Belarus meet, they always greet themselves with the word "Живи Belarus." And we all hope that Belarus is going to be a free country in the future, because we and we all have the right to this. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Melle, for your words, for your welcoming speech, and also for reminding us of the importance of the independence of the country. And of course, thank you very much for your support to our format.
Welcome again, Dr. Jan-Philipp Wölbern, Desk Officer, Eastern Europe, Konrad-Adenauer Stiftung here in Berlin. Dr. Wölbern, thank you again for having us. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Members of government institutions, colleagues from our partner institutions as the German-Belarussian Society, the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Osteuropa-Kunde, the German Eastern Business Association, the German-Russian Exchange, Berlin Economics and further NGOs, colleagues from other political foundations, and last but not least, representatives and leaders of the Belarusian opposition movement. I see Mr. Latushka here today with us. Good to see you again in Berlin. Welcome to Berlin. My name is Jan-Philipp Wölbern. I'm Desk Officer Eastern Europe at the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, and I would like to welcome you all warmly to the Academy of the Adenauer Foundation here in Berlin. It is the second forum, which for obvious reasons cannot be held in the Belarusian capital, but it is also the first Minsk forum to be held in presence since the beginning of the pandemic. So at least this is possible again. So it is a pleasure for us to host this year's Minsk forum in Berlin, which we have been supporting and working together since 1999, which I learned this morning. What binds us together in this format are our common values. We believe in peaceful dialogue as the only instrument to solve conflicts within societies and between states. We believe in democratic values as the right to vote and including the right to vote politicians out of office. And we believe in the rule of law as the very basis for the respect of human rights, freedom and economic prosperity. All of these values are violated in Belarus by the Lukashenko regime at the moment. This makes it even more important for us to support the democratic forces in Belarus and to search for ways out of the very difficult situation Belarus currently faces. Today's panels will thus address three central questions. First of all, is there any peaceful way out of this crisis within the country, and also the crisis between Belarus and the EU? Second, which effect do the current sanctions on Belarus really have on the regime in Minsk? And finally, which are possible scenarios for the future? Without much further ado, I would like to thank you for coming and hand over to the panelists in the first discussion today. Thank you very much for being with us here today.
Well, thank you. And now, actually, I give the floor to Peter for moderating the next session. Thank you for this morning's session.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very glad to welcome you at the Minsk Forum. I remember that it's not the first Minsk Forum. There were many, and many years ago, the situation was such that Belarus was a white spot on the European map. And only we, the specialists, the experts who were meeting here, we knew that Belarus is not somewhere behind the forests, but in the center of Europe. Last year, it turned out that Belarus really is in the center of the global attention. And today, Belarus is one of the hotspots in Europe. Everybody is looking at what is going on there. And that is why today's discussion with my three guests will be a discussion about two questions. The first question is the question about the situation on the Belarusian-Polish border. We have to speak about this because we know that this situation was provoked in order to be discussed. And in order for no discussions about the internal situation of Belarus taking place. Stefan Melle of the German-Russian exchange just mentioned that. And during the second half of the discussion, we are going to talk about the internal situation of the country, about the so-called constitutional reform and the continuation of the difficult situation of the democratic opposition, and about the internal political events around political prisoners and so on. I would like to present the guests of our podium. These are from Warsaw, Pavel Latushka. He's a member of the Coordination Council of the Belarusian Civil Society, a former Minister of Culture, and former director of the Kopalov Theater. And in Warsaw, he established his own center, which supports the structures of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya in Vilnius and supports Belarusian opposition forces in exile. Next to me, Matthias Lüttenberg is sitting. He is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany. He is also the Director for Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. Thank you for coming. And last but not least, Marina Rachley of the German Marshall Fund, an expert on Belarus, and as far as I know, she is from Belarus herself, and she is a political expert about the political situation of Belarus.
So, Mr. Lüttenberg, I think we'll start from you, and we'll start with the situation on the border. I would ask you, after all the signals and the events of yesterday, I would like you to tell us what the current situation is as regards the conflict between Minsk, Warsaw, Berlin, etc. What's your perspective on this?
Mr. Weichsel, on the way to this event, I spoke to my Polish colleague in Warsaw, just to once again explain our policies, and I can truly say we are united in our efforts between Warsaw and Poland and Berlin, and whatever you sometimes hear or read, we are closely working together. The situation at the Polish-Lithuanian, Latvian border with Belarus is still very serious. It's not yet solved. It still poses a threat to life of thousands of people who are caught between the Polish border and the Belarusian security forces. Poland and others defend the borders of the EU against this irregular migration. We need to make sure that humanitarian assistance is provided first and foremost by UNHCR and the IOM. We also have to organize the repatriation. There are first encouraging signals, and you will have heard it, that 400 people have returned to Iraq successfully. We need to stop the constant flow of migrants from many different countries. It's not only about Iraq and the Kurds from there, it's also about Syria, it's about Yemen, it's about potentially also Afghanistan. We reach out to these countries, the EU reaches out to these countries, and we do see first encouraging signals whenever certain airlines refuse to transport people who have a one-way ticket to Belarus from certain countries. But let me be clear, it is no coincidence that people reach the Belarusian borders with the EU. They have been invited, encouraged, and transferred by Lukashenko's regime. They have been equipped and assisted in their attempt to cross the border by Lukashenko's regime. Some have managed. Despite the tight control, almost 10,000 illegal crossings into Germany from Poland have been registered this year, most of them via Belarus. The responsibility, and this has been often said, lies with Lukashenko, who uses human beings from third states as an instrument for his own goals. Yet, he seems to be realizing that he cannot continue like that. The people he called are about to stay. We must not allow Lukashenko to drive a wedge between EU member states. We must stay united, and we must be solidary with all our countries which are at the border. We must not give in to the pressure from Lukashenko, and to say that very clearly, Chancellor Merkel did neither give in to the pressure nor did she recognize the results of the scandalous elections of 2020. Our response as the EU to the instrumentalization of migration was clear and determined. The new criterion on illegal migration allows us to sanction, for example, travel agencies or flight companies from these countries. In addition, the foreign ministers of the EU on Monday agreed on a fifth package of sanctions, which includes, inter alia, the Belarusian airline Belavia. Once again, I say we haven't overcome the challenge yet, but at least there are some glimmers of hope. Let us not forget that we are talking about human beings in need at our borders. Our dilemma is Lukashenko's advantage. While we take care, he and his regime have so far not spent much thought on what this trip to Belarus does to the people and their hopes. At the end of the day, we have to realize that Lukashenko's readiness to invest even more energy into eluding people, bringing people to the borders, is in reaction to our sanctions. And he might be increasingly aggressive the more sanctions we will decide upon. I just mentioned the rather weird example of stopping the gas flow through the Yamal pipeline. We don't know what he's up to, so we have to be prepared, and we have to stand in solidarity in the EU, but also with the people of Belarus and with those who are fighting the migration on our borders, the illegal or irregular migration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we switch to Pavel Latushka, I would like to ask one question. My assessment of the situation is that the regime in Minsk prepared a trap for the European Union, and the situation right now is not that by taking up this situation in the same way he constructed it, Lukashenko constructed it, we did get out of this, but it's just a mirror of what he did. So he's able, with his propaganda inwards, to mobilize people and to show them that the reaction of especially Poland, but the whole European Union is just the same cruel reaction as his regime, so what he's doing is normal. Everybody is just doing realpolitik. That's what he wanted to show, and he's able to show it. And my question is that this unity among European countries, it's very important, but it does not mean that one approach, the tough approach of Poland, stigmatizing migrants, and we have all seen pictures produced by state agencies of Poland which are as far from the truth as what Lukashenko is presenting us. We have seen that. So being together, European EU countries, does not mean that we have to follow this one way. And yesterday it seemed that there was a chance for kind of a solution. And is it gone or is it not gone?
First of all, I would like to comment on what you said on pictures being produced or not produced. What happens at the border is really a huge challenge for our Polish friends and colleagues, and it is of course in everybody's interest here that the borders of the EU are protected, and we also state very clearly that certain rules have to be followed. I mean, whatever is going on there has to be treating human beings with dignity, and everything that is opposing this approach is of course not what we would like to see. I'm not saying that this is happening. I just say that we should appeal to everybody to, and this is true for all border guards as well as for others in Lithuania or elsewhere. I still see that there is some movement. Some may argue that this has not been enough, and that it's a reaction by the regime to prevent further sanctions from taking place. But we are not stupid either. We are monitoring these things very closely in the countries of origin of the migrants, as well as, of course, in our immediate neighborhood, on our borders. We are talking to all sorts of people, airlines, governments, whoever may contribute to either taking these people back or stopping them to come to Belarus. And there we do see successes. It's not necessarily Lukashenko who changed his mind. It's rather that the international attention and the possibility of sanctions against airlines of third states, which helped change some people's minds. If we reach a change of mind in Lukashenko, I don't know yet. What we do see is that he's looking also for a solution. He cannot be satisfied with what he sees, because these people begin to be stuck in his country, and this is certainly nothing he can sell to his own people, so he wants to get rid of them, either by taking them back or by asking the EU, as he does via public. And I have to state that clearly, there's no offer of Germany or anybody else to take 2,000 people. This has been propaganda of the Belarusian regime. We will, of course, not offer doing this, and our minister Heiko Maas was as clear as Horst Seehofer, who was just in Poland yesterday. This is not our preferred option. I cannot rule out that at the end of the day we might change our mind, but of course this is not what we are doing now. We want these people to return to their countries, and this is what we're working on, and this is what we see happening, and therefore we will encourage everybody to continue this way. And the more the word is spreading that people are coming back, that people are not satisfied with what they experienced at all. I heard some people on the radio this morning who said it was a terrible experience in Belarus. These were Iraqis who returned. And this is important to make clear to everybody that this is not the easy way into Europe or into Germany.
Pavel Latushka, как вы
Pavel Latushka, what is your take on this situation? Well, to begin with, I would like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to attend the Minsk Forum, for the possibility to discuss the topical issues arising in and around Belarus. First of all, related to the activity of the regime, which is still in power in our country. I would like to refer to the phone conversation between Chancellor Merkel and Mr. Lukashenko. I think it's a very topical issue which raised many questions among the democratic forces in Belarus. The first response, I want to say we conducted no sociological polls, just a few questioning at the internet. Show that 80 to 90% of Belarusians showed no understanding of that step by Chancellor. They were quite critical of that. Their impression was that this came across as a kind of a recognition of Lukashenko as president. And I think what should be done now. First of all, we as diplomats read attentively the communique published on the results of those conversations. The conversation was between Chancellor of Germany and Mr. Lukashenko. That's very important. But I think for Belarusian society, it's very important to hear what Mr. Lüttenberg said today, and I thank him for the words that the German government does not recognize Lukashenko as president. The second thing Belarusian society would like to hear from the German government is that the German government is mindful of the sufferings of the people of Belarus. As a human being, and I think we all, as humans, are upset about the fate of those migrants which are trapped on the border. And there are about 7,000 people, as government representative Eisman of Belarus said. But I would like to make clear that this issue is not to be considered separately from the issue of human rights violations against Belarusians, while thousands are incarcerated illegally, when dozens have been murdered and no investigation was conducted, and thousands of Belarusians had to flee their country. And it's very important to hear that message, that the government of Germany is going to step up its efforts in support of Belarusian democratic transformation. This is what we are expecting now. As regards other things, I think we think, all of us, that this is not a spontaneous event. This is a special operation by security services of Lukashenko, and I would like to say the following: we all think that this problem has been created artificially by Lukashenko for its political purposes. And Mr. Lüttenberg said that about 11 migrants have already died. The last case was 1-year baby. So as a lawyer, I can put a question whether this is an act of international terrorism, and this issue has to be raised now. The issue of international legal responsibility of the dictator and his accomplices involved in the committing of crimes in and outside of Belarus. This is our message we have been sending for a long time to the European structures. While we have no remedy within Belarus, and a lot depends on the members of the European Union and international organizations. At yesterday's meeting with Mr. Berger, I heard an important thing, that the German legislation does provide such possibilities. There have been precedents related to Syria, and 10 cases have been filed within the German jurisdiction on cases of torture and we would like to see some progress on all these cases. Also, there is the Danish platform of accountability for Belarus. We know about this platform, but I have to say that unfortunately we have absolutely no possibility to contact it, and all our attempts to contact it have crushed on the kind of a wall. And as far as we understand, substantial funds have been allocated to this platform, and it works together with the UN High Commissioner, Human Rights Commissioner, and there is no way to find out what facts and data have been gathered and what the results are. So I would like to call on you for possible cooperation in this. Also important, we've heard that the European Union is planning to allocate 700,000 euro for the help to migrants. Lukashenko is not planning to take them out of Belarus, as evidenced by the fact that they are vaccinating those people with a Chinese vaccine, which makes us suspect that they are going to stay in Belarus. So now we see that 700,000 are going to be allocated for this help, and it's very important that it doesn't end up in the hands of Lukashenko's regime, because SDR allocations were allocated and ended up in the hands of Lukashenko, and we know that this money is going to be channeled through the Belarusian Red Cross, and we prepared a statement that the Belarusian Red Cross was actively involved in the activity of district commissions which were rigging the elections, because it's a purely governmental organization, and the Belarusian Red Cross was headed by some Mr. Pinevich. I'm very familiar with him. I worked with him in the government. Now he is Minister of Health. So Mr. Pinevich conceals from the Belarusian society data about the real scale of the COVID catastrophe in Belarus and the number of deaths he is also concealing. And the Belarusian Red Cross provided no help to those tortured in Okrestina and Zhodina. So today the Red Cross is headed by Deputy Ministry of Health. So we can not influence this process of providing those resources, but I think it would be sacrilegious to give those resources over to a part of the government repressive machine, apparat. So I would like to make the use of this opportunity of the presence of Mr. Lüttenberg. And I would like this to become known to our society. So, as regards our expectations of the current and the future government of Germany, we would like to hear that Lukashenko is not a legitimate president. Secondly, don't forget about Belarusian society. And thirdly, it's important to hold the regime and its accomplices criminally liable for crimes against humanity.
Thank you.
Latushka, just to clarify the last point that you made. Germany has given money for the Red Cross, but not of Belarus, but to Poland and Lithuania. It's a clear, just I wanted to not to people remind them the wrong information. It has been given to the Red Cross, the German Red Cross, and then will be transferred to Lithuanian and Polish Red Cross only. We are aware of the Belarusian Red Cross and its connections to the regime. We're not supporting this.
I think that all of us agree with the three things that you mentioned at the end of your talk. The question is just today, what can we do and how can we get out of this stalemate? And this is a question I would like to ask Marine Rachlier. I ask you as an expert, from the German Marshall Fund, how do you assess the situation and how can we get out of the situation in which we are?
Question that you would like me to start with. I will resort to English and probably pick up where Pavel Latushka left it. I think that the crisis, the crisis that it is not migrant crisis as such, that is man-made and constructed, and at the border between Belarus and Poland, is very polarizing. We see that the reaction in European countries is very different to what is happening there and what the reaction should be. That there are different voices even in German political circles, but also in the Belarusian society. It's not that that Belarusians are feeling for the migrants or that they are against these people being brought to the country, that the solidarity with the migrants that I experience basically the same pressure or being manipulated by the regime, that this solidarity is you can also say missing within Belarus. Same as the reaction to the measures that Germany resorts to, that the federal chancellor already twice spoke to Lukashenko on the phone. Some do think that in Belarus that this is the right thing to do because there's no one else to call if one wants to solve this crisis, or at least try to solve it, because this is Lukashenko who constructed it, who is responsible for it, and who is at the end of the day then the one to solve it or resolve it. Your question was, what is today the way to deal with it? The polarizing effect of the situation that Lukashenko created on the border is also, I mean, you can see it with this political panel, that we do not start with the internal situation in Belarus, but we speak about the current urgent crisis on the border. So it's probably not that much about the border, because we see that there are international efforts working with the countries of origin that have been quite successful, that I would agree with the fellow panelists here. By the way, there are now reports that there are middlemen of Belarus now being in Latin America and North Africa, ready to probably bring migrants from there to Belarus. So it's not that the EU or the West can solve the crisis on their part. There should be some cooperation or willingness to cooperate in Minsk. But the source of the problem is current civic and political crisis in Belarus. What happened a year and a half ago, that there is a president who the majority of Belarusians, I would say, considers illegitimate. And he is basically resorting to the same means he has been using since 27 years being in power, that he does what he wants. If he needs repressions to stay in power, then he uses repressions. If he wants to create a threat on the border to the NATO countries, then he constructs routes to bring people in. There are now reports that migrants are trying to protest in the central streets of Minsk, basically doing the same what Belarusians a year and a half ago, or even still a year ago, protesting against the way they are treated by the government that too many Belarusians do not consider to be elected. So coming back to your question, I think it is important for the Western partners, yes, trying to solve this crisis on the border, to keep the bigger picture in mind and not forget the conditions that have been on the table since August 2020. Not forget the promises and plans on the sanctions, which actually, which is not happening. It's not that these plans are abandoned, and the fifth package of the sanctions has been announced on Monday. But again, as Pavel Latushka also underscored, there should be then two messages coming from the West. On the one hand, yes, we do try to tackle the humanitarian side of the created crisis, but on the other hand, we stay behind Belarusian people and their aspirations.
Before we really switch to the internal situation, I would like come back to the question you raised, Mr. Latushka. Such a big mistrust in Belarusian democratic society towards Germany or German foreign policy. I'm not a representative of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, not at all. But nevertheless, when I watch the situation, let's take the last 10 years, it's very clear that it was Germany who organized in the European Union sanctions against Russia, who is strongly organizing sanctions against the Lukashenko regime. And it's very clear that this unity of the European Union is organized by Germany. And it's not in the direction of lifting sanctions, but tightening sanctions. Nevertheless, there have to be some talks, not to Mr. President, not to any kind of legitimate person, but to the person who is in power right now. It's about kind of realpolitik to make the situation better for all. Isn't it up to you, representatives of the democratic Belarusian society, to explain to all people that the attempt to find a solution does not mean to forget about Belarusian democratic society?
Ну, я хотел бы, наверное, оценить.
I would like to assess it the following way. The expectations of the Belarusian society towards the European Union and a lesser interest of the EU to support the Belarus made today's situation possible. Of course, we want that the EU and Germany, as one of the key countries within the EU, played a more active role. And maybe a more operative role to react to the challenges that the Belarusian society is facing. I don't want to put our responsibility to Germany or the EU, but we have the feeling that the EU is not using all possible tools that it has. I understand that there is a problem with taking decisions unanimously within a union of 27 countries. But in August, you reacted to the mass violence, to the first murders which were taking place in Belarus, I think in September. Then Cyprus was blocking decisions on sanctions, and maybe we as diplomats understand the situation, but the Belarusian society was really hoping for the EU and Germany to support them. And Chancellor Merkel, maybe there were too high expectations into her from the Belarusian society, and the actions of Mrs. Merkel, her telephone call, could change the situation, but maybe not in a way that the society in Belarus was hoping for. But the main challenge for us, for the democratic forces in Belarus, is as high as the challenge for the European democratic forces. I am an advocate of European values, and this morning I gave an interview to Deutsche Welle, and I told them that I will stay also an advocate for the German government. I will try to understand why and explain why this telephone call took place, why it was just a telephone call on the security situation on the border, that it was meant to solve a local military conflict, and this is a threat not only to the security of Europe but also of Belarus. Of course, Belarus also doesn't want to become a member of a military conflict. The Belarusian situation is not a standard situation. I would like to ask a question. Can you imagine that as a result of the dialogue which some politicians in the EU are asking Lukashenko for, that Lukashenko is going to take a decision and is going to free all thousands of political prisoners? Maria Kolesnikova, Viktor Babarik, Mikolai Satkevich, Pavel Sinevich, do you think that they are going to be able to freely walk on the streets of Minsk? Is anybody believing in this here? I don't. Is anybody believing that Lukashenko will register 285 NGOs which were liquidated in the last months? This is one of the what was one of the first decisions that Lukashenko took. Does anybody here believe in this? I don't. Does anybody here believe that our media are going to become independent again? Many of our media have to work from exile. I don't think that they are going to return to Belarus shortly. Do you think that there are going to be court cases against those who killed, who tortured? I don't think so. And these 500,000 Belarusian people who have to live in exile now, do you think that they will come back shortly? I don't think so. Is anybody here in this room who believes in this? You can raise your hand, but I don't think so. So there is no way back. There's not going to be the same scenario as 5 years ago or 10 years ago. At that time, I was listening to the negotiations about sanctions. At that time, we were really having trade with Belarus. Now we are having sanctions, and this trade that was going on in the past must not take place again. If we say that the situation is not a standard situation, then only with sanctions you can't solve the problem. And we agree with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's office. We support her. She says that we must not acknowledge Lukashenko, and just today the president of Lithuania also said that. The European Parliament on the 7th of November declared that they signed a resolution which says that we must not acknowledge Lukashenko. We have to block money, funding from international organizations going to Belarus. The second thing is legal responsibility, because what is going on at the moment? If Lukashenko will solve the migrant crisis, a crime took place, and I am a lawyer. There was a crime, and we must not forget about this crime. We must not forget about the murders which took place and which are still going on under Lukashenko. This week, I was listening to CNN and ZDF in Berlin this morning, and everybody is speaking about the migrant crisis, and nobody is speaking about Belarus. There are hundreds of political prisoners in Belarus. There are people in prison, for example, mothers of children, of 5 children. I know such people. We were living together in one village, and there are still court cases going on against political activists. In Brest, for example, just recently 100 people were imprisoned. The Belarusian People's Front was liquidated, and so on and so on. Nobody is talking about these events in Europe. And that is why in Warsaw I went to the press and asked them not to forget about Belarus. It is necessary to put criminals to court and, of course, to support real sanctions. I support the Polish government, who says we don't want migrants to enter Poland. And I believe that Lukashenko will only listen to a voice that is stronger than his. It is necessary that he asks for telephone calls, and you have to talk to him only in cases when there is no other option, when only the person who calls him will speak. So the situation is difficult, particularly in view of the humanitarian crisis going on the border. And of course, we have to solve the situation, but we also have to use political and economic tools in order to stop Lukashenko. Our journal, the journal I work for, OSTEUROPA, on our website, in the printed version, we wrote a lot about solidarity with Belarus, and every day we document, we translate with the help of the organization Wisna. Yes, I know that. I am talking about the global community. Yes, of course. In the discussion about the internal situation, we already ended this discussion, actually. But before we continue, the organizers asked a member of the German Bundestag, Niels Schmidt, a member of the Social Democratic Party, to present a short video statement. We are going to listen to this statement, and then we are going to continue with our discussion.
Afternoon, there will be scenarios for Belarus 22. It goes without saying that we won't discuss everything. We won't go in depth of these scenarios, but as far as I'm informed, you basically know what's in the scenarios, and I do. And as we have you right now here, I really want to ask the question, what's the path as you see it, referring to these scenarios for Belarus in the next years to come? We all agree with Mr. Latushka that we don't believe, I want to repeat what you said, that Господин Lukashenko will do, or we don't believe that. But do we believe that there is another solution? What's, in your opinion, possible? What are possible scenarios, and how could we come to a slightly better situation? Not a revolution, but a better situation for the people of Belarus.
Well, thank you. This is a difficult question, of course. I mean, there's, if it was easy, I think we would have started a while ago. We are living in a situation which is constantly deteriorating from our point of view. We have seen a constant escalation of violence and oppression against the people of Belarus. And while we stand in admiration, deepest respect for the leaders of the opposition like you, Pavel Latushka, and many others, including, of course, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, we do have to realize that even though we have such a courageous and persistent people in Belarus, that we have not yet reached the results that we had hoped for. And we have now often referred to the 870 or more political prisoners. These numbers are are shocking, and they are reason to continue, of course, our striving for a better future of those individuals, but also for free and fair elections and for a change of the constitution of Belarus. I don't see any real alternatives to these three key demands. How to get there? We have had 4 packages of, I think, painful sanctions against the regime, its supporters, and its financial sources, and still we do not really see a change in behavior of Mr. Lukashenko. We must therefore not give up. We have to continue. We have to continue raising the awareness of our people here in Germany, but also of EU member states who are maybe far away from Belarus and from what happens here and at the border. But let's focus on the internal situation, the domestic situation. This is something, and I really like what I see when some leaders of the opposition are traveling to each and every member state of the EU to spread the word, to inform. Let's see. I will try this one. Now it works. Okay, to spread the word, to inform, and to give concrete advice, like you are doing. Every visit is more than welcome, because you give us the mirror to see, are we doing the right thing or are we not doing the right thing? And the questions you are asking, sometimes you hear things, you check with us, is this right or is this not? This is so helpful. This is without alternative. This goes without saying. Still, the force and intimidation that is used against the people has not really changed. Therefore, I think we have to also use every instrument that we have, not only in the EU, but also in the transatlantic coordination with our partners and friends, not only in the US, also in Canada and elsewhere, because we are only strong when we are united. And the case of Belarus shows that, of course, there's a limited number of countries in the world who have different view as we do, including, of course, Russia. And one may wonder, is now Russia holding one of the keys or the most important keys to solving this issue? In my view, it is like that. And this explains also why Chancellor Merkel is talking to Vladimir Putin about Belarus. As we see it, he's the only ally that Lukashenko has left. He's the only person who's ready to invest money, political capital, because he knows what he's getting. He's getting, and we mentioned this before, the matter of independence is at stake here. Is Belarus going to survive as an independent country, or will it be absorbed in some sort of union state and enrolled in 28 action plans that lead to nothing else but the full control of the Kremlin over your country? And this is a serious question. And on the other side, I was in Moscow last week and I had discussions with colleagues there. I don't really see that they have a plan. I don't really see that they know how to solve this problem, because they must and they cannot be happy with what they see. And I think Putin's interview yesterday also alluded to the fact that this is not a status quo with which everybody is comfortable. This doesn't mean that I think that they know what should be the alternative scenario. Is there a person that they would like to see instead of Lukashenko as the president of Belarus? Would they like to support the idea of free and fair elections without knowing what's going to be the outcome at the end of the day? I doubt it. And the more Putin looks at Belarus, the more he's looking at his own potential future. And as what we saw last August, when people took the streets, I think this gave him really something to think about. And he took all the measures. I'm not escaping the issue here, but I just wanted to give a remark that after the Duma elections, which were at least as fake as the ones in Belarus, people did not take the streets anymore. People were, at least not in the same amount of people. So Putin somehow manages to control, and he's learning, of course, he's learning from what Lukashenko is doing, and therefore he's trying to keep him in power for as long as he thinks this is necessary. And of course he has its own agenda. So therefore one of the keys, and probably even the most important one, lies in Moscow. What we can do, I think, Germany has, and it was mentioned, we have drawn up an action plan for civil society. This includes a number of different measures. I don't want to name all of them, but we are looking at the media, we're looking at scholarships for students, we're looking at an easier access to visa for those who are really in need. And of course, this is only part of what we're doing. The accountability mechanism for human rights violations was mentioned, and I'm happy to look into the matter of access for you and Mr. Latushka, and how can this be improved. I wasn't aware of this problem, because I think this is the one collection point where we want to have a good overview of what is going on, so and be able to further on take these cases to the court, and therefore every input is of course welcome in principle. I don't think that the constitutional reform, which is often referred to, will be a game changer. If it's in February or maybe later, easy to imagine that it can be postponed. What can we expect? We don't know much about it. It's very intransparent. So what we hear, like strengthening the All-Belarusian Assembly, or however this is called in English, these are elements which are not in any way a response to what people want. This is not what has been consulted with the people. It has not been consulted with anybody outside Belarus. So how can this be a way forward? I don't see it. But on the other side, what else could we ask for? I mean, we are doing what we can, and only if we are serious about it, and if we don't forget about the people, about the prisoners, then I think this is the only chance we have. Mr. Lukashenko, I don't know, maybe the day will come, and this is the day we all must hope for and prepare for, because then once there's another person, and I hope that whoever will be following him will be a different kind of person, then of course the doors will be open for free and democratic Belarus. But until that day, we have to stand together and not be distracted by either migration issues or whatever comes next. We will see, but keep an eye on what's really important.
Marina. The situation between the relationship between German society and German government on the one hand, and Belarusian society and Belarusian government on the other hand, is completely different. You have a severe confrontation between democratic society and the dictator, non-legitimate dictator, but the situation here is completely different. So what Germany can do is a kind of a partition of labor, functional partition of labor between a society that gives clear signals of solidarity with the oppressed, political prisoners, people in Lithuania, in Poland, Belarusian immigration, to you personally, to all your colleagues, to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, signs of solidarity on the one hand from German European civil society, and as kind of a functional petition, kind of a dialogue on very narrow questions to get forward on a political level. Is it possible to explain to opposition structures, to the Belarusian civil society as a whole, that such a partition of labor is not kind of a between treason?
I don't think so that it's possible. I can probably start with the Turkish joke about a prison library where the librarian says, "No, we don't have this book, but we have we don't have this book here, but we have the writer." It's been almost 1.5 years. As of today, 873 people are recognized as political prisoners. Yes, there are no visible or massive public protests as it was possible a year ago, because it's just impossible. You cannot expect kamikaze acts from people who have families in their own lives. They tried it, they failed, also because the response from the state was so brutal and so inhumane. Again, a lot of people are in prison. Too many had to flee. fearing their life and health. And if the response coming from Berlin is is half-hearted, saying that we will leave the non-diplomatic part to the society, which is, I mean, who is then the society? What are the organizations that would be taken this seriously? When this bleeding civil society is expecting full solidarity coming from around the world. Interestingly enough, this solidarity is what keeps them going. People in Belarus say that when they leave the country for recreation or for conferences, that they are actually surprised to notice that when you're outside, what happens in Belarus looks twice as worse. Because what keeps them going inside is this like small acts of support and solidarity that they experience basically every day. Being on the market, talking to people on public transport, seeing other people wearing ribbons of the right colors, white, red, white, or just white. I don't think this would be seen as a clear signal of support if the German government divides the responsibility and says, well, we are responsible for talking with the still official channels, and the rest will be done by our civil society. Talking about Russia, that is, of course, the elephant in the room, one of the major players in this situation. I do think it's a little bit awkward to believe that Moscow is able to solve the problem in Belarus. If they do so, will your colleagues, Mr. Lüttenberg, gather around the table and think how we can resolve the situation in Belarus that it's the way Belarusians wanted. If they do so, then it's going to be clearly in the interests of Moscow. That's basically like inviting the fox to fix problems in the chicken house. I would even like to see on the European agenda, on the international agenda, that the question of dealing with Russia is decoupled from the Belarusian question. Because Russia is so polarizing. Even within the EU, we have also seen with the Cyprus case in autumn last year that Russia polarizes. There's no consensus on how deep the ties should be, what should be the consequences of which actions. So treating these two countries separately it would be already a step forward. And the reforms that have been mentioned, constitutional reforms that are allegedly to be expected in February. Again, I do not see this happening. That would be a very large probe for the current regime, not only to see how far social mobilization can pick up again under the circumstances of constant repressions, but also to check the loyalty of their own structures. Because if they strike or refuse to organize this referendum the way all electoral campaigns have been organized for the last 27 years, then there is a big problem. And as long as the regime is not sure that they want to make sure how loyal their people are and how far the society is frustrated with the current status quo, I'm not sure that this referendum is able to take place.
Would you like to directly comment on what Marina Rachli said?
Well, I think we are in agreement on most of the questions, especially when it comes to the role of Russia. Of course, Russia is a divisive factor in the EU, but in the case of Cyprus, this was more about Turkey and the issues that they had, that they postponed our decision-making. But in May, After the Ryanair incident, we showed that we can also be faster when it comes to agreeing on measures. I think we may like it or not, but of course I agree with you that Russians will not have a plan which is in the interest of the Belarusian people. This will not be the one that they prefer. So we have to have our own models at hand for the future of the country, and I think this can only be based on the expressed will of people in free and fair elections, and then it's time to change the constitution, and then everything might fall into its place. But how to get there, I still find it difficult to imagine how we can bring everybody to the table. There will be a conference, and Mr. Latushka, you will be there as well next week in Vienna, where we will have the opportunity to continue this discussion on the foreign ministers level. But the invitation has also gone to Russians to sit down and talk, but they are not attending. So there's no interest in talking about Belarus beyond the extent of the conversations that we are also having on the highest level here. But ultimately, I think a solution can only be found with everybody at the table, and not only the Kremlin, probably not only us as the EU.
One of the scenarios that will be presented this afternoon is called failed state. Belarus as a failed state, a regime which is not anymore able to provide basic things of everyday life for these 9.5 million people who are still in the country. As a result of a situation which was created by this regime and answered by the European Union and the United States and other countries with sanctions. I asked this question some weeks ago to Polish second head of the Polish Research Institute, OSTEUROPA, Mr. Konrad-Adenauer, what he thinks about the 9.5 million Belarusians still in the country and a failed state scenario. And he just answered, there is no more society, meaning civil society in Belarus, so what's up? What's the problem? Do you share this opinion?
There are not only 9.5 million or 10 million people in Belarus, but only 9 million people because of COVID and because of so many people have left the country, maybe even only 8 million people still living in the country. So there's really a catastrophe going on in Belarus. I would like to come back to yesterday's speech of Putin. I think this is also going to be important to speak about this. One asked the Belarusian government, Lukashenko, to start a dialogue with the opposition. And if we understand this as a game that was agreed upon with Lukashenko, then there can be different versions. But if we see this as a real appeal of Putin, then we have to understand that this is a real threat to Lukashenko. Even if we assume that Putin and Lukashenko agreed on this scenario, then why should the Russian president do this, speak to his colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? I think that not every general, not every soldier is going to know about this agreement, and not all organizations are going to know about secret agreements. So this is a very clear signal to civil officers, to the military, that Putin is not going to support Lukashenko's regime 100%. And the question is, should we continue to support Lukashenko and commit crimes every day? I know that we are having video streaming, and I want you to understand that maybe in a day or two we are going to get to know or to understand why Putin said that, but then we are going to assess the situation differently. Of course, we were thinking about this speech, and together with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, we agreed that it is not possible to speak with an opposition in prison. It is possible to talk with an opposition if there are democratic forces out of prison. And maybe if they are released, then such a dialogue is going to be necessary. But this is one of the necessary things to happen. It is also necessary that the violations of human rights stop. The portal thE, which was publishing reports on terrible crimes, on terrible human rights violations, was closed, and but there is torture going on in the center of Europe in the 21st century. And this is why we have to speak about a release of political prisoners. If the president of Russia is going to be a guarantor of this, then okay, of course he can be, and he can exert pressure on Lukashenko. We are interested that there are also other guarantors, for example, our partners in Europe, because only then we are going to have a level of trust and security that these things are really going to happen. And of course, we are ready to accept the support of our Western partners to support a transition of the power and to new democratic elections. So the threat of Putin towards Lukashenko was done, and we have to understand that. And maybe we should be ready to expect some other things going on in the future. Why do I speak about Putin? I think that he received some analysis by his secret services, by sociologists, and he has a very critical assessment of Belarus. And the image of the Chancellor Merkel, the image of President Duda, Zelensky is much higher among Belarusians than the image of Putin. These are data of the thE Institute, and only 3% of the Belarusians are ready to become a member of Russia. There are also data of the thE. 45% of Belarusians are against a union with Russia, and these are clear messages towards Russia. And this means that Moscow committed a strategical mistake in August last year and is continuing to make such mistakes. This strategic mistake can lead to more mistakes, which are deepening the gap between the peoples. The Belarusians don't understand and don't accept and very critical assess the activities of the Russian government, that they support the dictator Lukashenko, who is still in power, but not the Belarusian people. I think against this background, we must understand what Putin said yesterday. And in terms of the referendum, yes, of course, we don't know the text of the constitution. I agree with Mr. Lüttenberg. It's difficult to assess the document, which we don't know. But from the words Lukashenko said and his supporters, we understand that this is going to cement his power and his immunity for all of his life, and an additional immunity for all people who committed crimes against Belarusians. This is going to make the procedure of transforming the power more difficult, and so on and so on. And therefore, the position of the democratic forces, and shortly we are going to support them. We already agreed on this with our staff and with the Coordination Council and the initiative Goles, Zubr, honest people, and so on. We are going to take part in a referendum in order to stop the crimes against the Belarusian people. We are for active things to be done. We are for an opposition against the violations of rights that are continued to take place. And this is all, we are living in very turbulent times, and things can change every day. And we think that it's not that somebody else should reach freedom and security in our, or stability in our country, but we have to do that. Again, in order to assess Lukashenko better, every day we ask ourselves the question, will the sanctions against Lukashenko push him to Russia? But Lukashenko is not a guarantor of the independence of Belarus. This is just the basis. He is not a guarantor. And at the same time, he is even a danger to the security of Belarus and of the whole region. Will there be sanctions or not? But I think the plans of the Kremlin are also understandable to everybody, and this is why we should really do something urgently and not wait until something happens. Last year, events started. Today, we've got a migrant crisis, and I think that everybody understands that we should take urgent measures in order to survive. Thank you.
Answer to the question of the failed state. Perhaps you would like shortly to comment on the question, is this a possible scenario, and what should be done about it?
The situation does remain volatile, I would say, and a lot of things are also, unfortunately, still possible. I would even say that you can consider Belarus to be a failed state already now, because there's no rule of law, and the way decisions are taken, the way they're implemented, things are sometimes not even logical. How to fix it is, of course, $1 million question. I'm not sure there's something that would resolve this crisis immediately, and nobody has thought about it yet. It's important to stay on, like they call it, this dual track in Brussels, to increase pressure on the regime, to draw very clear lines what happens after which actions. I see that you want to interrupt.
Yes, I wanted to ask, is there any research done into other conflicts, historical conflicts in the last 50 years, similar conflicts or conflicts with some similarities, and how they have been resolved, if they have been resolved? If we take Syria, we learn that it has not been resolved. It's a complete disaster. The dictator won by force. But we have some conflicts where a solution, in the end, was done at a round table. And is there research to try to find similarities?
This is interesting to receive this question from somebody representing magazine OSTEUROPA. So have there been research, Mr. Weichsel? Are you aware of policy papers dedicated to Belarus, or have you tried to write about Belarus from this angle?
I think I should promise that we will do so, because this was just an idea but it's not only an academic task, it's also a talk of practical politicians to get out of this situation. But I promise that we will do that right now.
That's, take you by your word. I do agree with you that it's important that the politicians and think tankers that they do work together. At the same time, again, you cannot compare Polish situation with Solidarność and what's happening in Belarus. It's just uncomparable. The round table is a very nice concept, but it, again, as of now, there's nothing to force Lukashenko basically to submit to this to this condition and launch this national dialogue. That's why what would, again, Belarusians or common sense expect from the Western partners, that the three core demands that have been formulated, that they are always on the table, that there's these little premises to start with, and that they should never be abandoned. Political prisoners, dialogue, and free elections. I hope I'm not mixing them up. I haven't heard the three demands for quite a while. So there are then even four.
Yourself.
I'm sorry.
Yourself.
Yourself, sorry?
It's your microphone there.
Okay.
Да, я добавлю уже. Речь идет о...
There are three demands. The first one is the release of political prisoners. The second one is pressure and criminal suits against criminals. And the third is free elections.
Important is also to make it clear to the Kremlin that support of Lukashenko will come with a price tag, that it can be costly for Russia to support this the brutal regime in Minsk. But on the other hand, and again, that coming back to your question with outsourcing responsibilities for the German government, that even talking about the new German government, that the same government, while increasing pressure on the Belarusian regime, it increases support and its solidarity message to the Belarusian people, being creative, innovative in their approaches, how this help can be rendered. We see that protests in Belarus, they're probably not that visible now. There are no leaders who are in the country now, being at the head of the protests, leading the protests. But it's also the advantage of it, because if you don't have a leader, then this movement cannot be crushed at once. But at the same time, they do need this. Different groups, a lot of new faces, a lot of different topics, people who decided or who want or have no choice, who are in Belarus, that they will receive support from their European neighbors.
Thank you. I think we have come to an end. If there are no further comments from your side, I have to underline that from...
Благодарю.
Zmiter Lukashuk, Russian Radio for Belarus. I would like to draw your attention, maybe the attention of Mr. Lüttenberg, to one question. The Belarusian media are following this event, and I think it's not a secret that your words about that Belarus belongs to the fifth package of sanctions was already published in all independent Belarusian media. One thing to clarify, Belarus remains in the fifth package of sanctions, but we know that some countries do not support the exclusion of this airline, and the perspective that when this fifth package is going to be taken finally, that Belarus will remain in the package. And in continuation of the topic of the migrant crisis, do the Europeans understand that if today there will be negotiations between Lukashenko, Merkel, Putin on a solution of the conflict on the EU-Belarussian crisis border, do you understand that any situation that will not be in favor of Lukashenko will lead to new sanctions or to other measures? And do you understand that this can lead to a similar situation again taking place? So more than 400 migrants were already flown out to Iraq, but more than 2,000 are still in Belarus. We don't know the exact figures, but Pavel Latushka rightly said that they are vaccinated at the moment, and I think if something like this will not continue in Brusky, then in some other place it could take place again, and the situation could be repeated. And in terms of the words of Putin, you know, the Belarusian propaganda is already congratulating Voskresensky that Putin said this about him. He is the head of the Belarusian KGB. And Dukievich gave a talk in which he said that Tsipkal, Tikhanovskaya, and so on are not the opposition but traitors. And how can Putin support traitors? An opposition is something else. This is Hajdukevich and others, parties which are still in place in the country. But actually the opposition forces should all be liquidated in his point of view. And if such negotiations will take place, then yeah, I would like to hear your comments, and maybe such negotiations could be okay for Moscow, but I don't know what about the West.
We don't have much time looking at my watch. Important questions. First of all, on the sanctions, we are still, of course, in working on the final setup of. Yes. Okay. So maybe the discussion is still ongoing. Of course, it's about the legal acts which have to follow. What the ministers have decided is a general principle that we'll have this fifth package, and you are aware what are some of the elements which are under discussion. We are not objecting the fact of sanctioning also this mentioned airline, but of course we have to see. Are there any developments on the ground which will allow us to look into this before taking the ultimate legal measures? We see some developments which are encouraging, but of course in this discussion in Brussels on Monday, this was one of the parts of this package. On your second question. Of course, what we see right now, like bringing people back to Iraq, and will there be others? Will there be elsewhere? I wonder what is more of a pull factor, like bringing these people back or allowing them into the EU. And I think if they manage to cross the border into the EU, this of course would send a signal that yes, this is the way to get into the Western world, and of course we'll do everything to prevent this from happening. And the way that it's done right now seems to be the most promising one to me. On the question regarding the KGB, maybe this is more for Pavel Latushka to answer. I don't really have a comment on that one.
So thank you very much. I think there are no further questions. So I will. Okay. Yeah.
Отвечая на
Well, in response to your question, one who is always loyal to dictator and holds his position, such as Voskresensky, Gedukevich, cannot be referred to as a real opposition. They always follow the line of the dictator. I have not heard any criticism from them against the dictator. So based on my experience, I can say that by making such a statement, by calling on for cooperation with the opposition, Putin bases itself on real data. I already mentioned thE's data and our sociologists' data, and they clearly show who is the real opposition, and we can claim to be the majority. That's absolutely clear. And the president should have said the dialogue with the absolute majority of the Belarusian society, not with opposition. If he meant Gaidukevich and Voskresensky, I would put it this way: we would not be disappointed if this happens. And this would show once again that it's only upon us, Belarusians, that changes depend. We are the only ones able to effect changes without hoping too much for the West or anyone else, because it's only on us that our future depends. Thank you very much. Thanks to all. And
will already be at 12 o'clock. What I have done is I tried to find not a solution in this confrontation without an exit, but just a small path. If there could be some kind of not getting out of it, this is too much, but getting the situation a little bit better for people, for the Belarusian opposition, for Belarusian people in the country, and for the migrants. I haven't seen yet such a way, and I hope that the further discussions this day will perhaps open up such a window how we could proceed, not getting in the situation that the world is forgetting about Belarus. We won't, this is what we can promise, but you mentioned world media who are on the way to forget about it, and not to get stuck in this situation for further years, but somehow to get out of it. Thank you very much.